Early Fragments of Silicon is better than ever.
All right, welcome to another installment of the Fragments of Silicon Daylight interviews. Up this week is Andreas from Fast Travel Games.
Hey, thanks for having me.
No problem. How are you doing today?
Getting back from vacation, so it's okay. Not more than that, I'd say. But there's a lot on our plate at the moment at the studio, so it's good to be back at the same time.
How long were you on break?
Well, here in Sweden, we actually have 5 weeks of paid vacation every year. So I took 4 weeks off this summer and saved one for winter. So
neat.
Yeah, it's neat.
Anyway, getting into things, how we like to start is we like to get to know the people behind the studio, behind the game, and all that stuff. And we do this by asking this particular question: what got you interested in video games, both on a personal and professional level?
Oh, wow. I've been playing video games since the first Nintendo came out. I bought it at a bicycle store in my hometown here in Sweden. And since then, I've been a fan of video games, but I joined the industry by accident, actually. Well, not by accident, but I went to London to be an exchange student and had so much time on my hands that I decided to get a job on the side. And I just randomly walked into a game store in Fulham in London and asked the manager if they needed people, and they did. So I started working at a game store in London. This was back in 2003, so almost 20 years ago. And when I get back to Sweden, I basically decided to keep pursuing some kind of career in video games. And yeah, 20 years later, I've been doing this now, video games and marketing, for at least 17 years.
Okay. And how did you manage to bridge the gap into game development and working at a video game developer?
Yeah, that's interesting. I started out in retail. I think again it's a little bit by chance, to be honest. I used to work at Game, which is like the equivalent of GameStop, I guess, but in Europe. I worked at a store and then at the office for the retailer. And then a friend of mine worked at Vivendi Games, who then became Activision Blizzard. Mm-hmm. This was also early in the 2000s. And he basically got me to join them as a product manager for part World of Warcraft and other titles like Crash Bandicoot and The Bourne Identity. And so that was my first job at a developer and a publisher. And that's what I've been doing since then. I've been moving around between different companies like EA DICE, Bandai Namco, and right now that I'm doing VR games marketing at Fast Travel Games. So it's been a roller coaster ride for me, to say the least.
Sounds like it. And so that beckons the question: how did you end up at Fast Travel Games?
I had worked at Bandai Namco for 2 years, and this is around 4 years ago. And basically been doing the same thing for different companies for quite a long time. Mm-hmm. And during my time at EA DICE, I worked at Battlefield, and we got to try out the very early dev kit of the Oculus Rift. This must have been 6-ish years ago, I think, 6 or 7 years ago. And I was simply amazed by the experience. I got to fly as a sort of a mech robot above a city. And I remember leaving that room and the headset feeling, oh, wow, this is something I have to work with in the future. Then it took some time before VR home gaming became a thing, of course. But as Fast Travel Games were founded, I knew some people. One of the founders I used to work with at EA Dice. I saw that they needed a marketing and PR person to handle everything, basically games and company things for Fast Travel Games. So I applied for the job, and this was in fall 2017. And I got the job and been doing this now for 4 years.
Okay, and what is it like marketing VR games as opposed to more traditional fare?
Oh, wow, this is a hefty topic. I actually have held a lecture about this. So do we have an hour or two?
I mean, we have an hour.
No, it's really interesting because VR gaming is still only around 5 years old, while flat screen gaming industry, or flat screen gaming has been around for around 40 years or so. So we know relatively little about VR gamers of today, and it's constantly growing and expanding. So you have to learn about your basic target audience all the time, try things out and see what actually resonates with the different people out there. Then you have the different headset owners who have different requirements or needs or interests and all that. So to me, it was like an uncharted territory almost. I had to throw a lot of old school things away and apply some new tactics and try things out. And that's probably why I love this job so much. It's such a young industry, and we know so little about our audiences.
True enough. Though Fast Travel Games has been at its, I hesitate to say longer than most, but you've got more than more than one VR game, which is a leg up on some other developers we've had on the program, right? And they are quite varied too.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, our first game is a action adventure, a little bit like in the direction of Half-Life or Metroid. The second game was a miniature world cute puzzler where you saved lost animals. And we also made the sequel to Buddy Cuts 2 together with Neat Corporation, who made the first one. But then the latest title is a very, very dark and sinister horror title. So you can basically say we've been moving between genres and styles and tones ever since the company was founded. Someone actually called us the Nintendo of VR gaming. I think that's pretty cool. I'm not sure exactly what it means, but I like it. And I think we do a lot of different things, and it's part of the reason of this is part because we have to try things out. There aren't many yet, I'd say, narrative-driven single-player games at a high quality, and that's something we've been trying to pursue with both our first game, Apex Construct, but maybe more so with the latest one, Wraith the Oblivion, Afterlife. So yeah, we have been changing a lot between the games, and I think what we have coming next, which is not yet announced, is something again completely different from what we've done in the past. So it's fun.
No doubt. I mean, and it sounds like you are reaching for a higher level of VR than what a lot of people do these days. It's like, the state of VR development and this is in an interesting place because, as I understand it, a lot of stuff's gravitating towards the Oculus ecosystem. Yeah,
I mean, I won't shy away from the fact that the Oculus Quest launch, the first one, but maybe even more so with the second one, has meant a tremendous boost for us as a company. Both our existing titles have been selling really well. I think just the last time I looked, the Oculus Quest accounted for over 60% of all unit sales, and with our existing games, Afterlife excluded, but our two previous titles. And those are multi-platform titles, so they are available on PSVR and SteamVR and Viveport as well. But even so, the Quest is still accounting for the majority of sales. So I think just the Quest has helped us reach, or actually helped VR reach a new kind of audience. Because in the beginning, it was very early adopter and tech-savvy people who got into VR. Now we see more of a general gaming audience. I don't want to call them casual, but a more general gaming audience, the less sort of hardcore-ish kind of gamer, also entering VR for the first time due to the low price and stuff with the new Quest. So it has meant a lot for us and for any developer, I think, who is part of their ecosystem.
Indeed. Though, are you concerned about that becoming a double-edged sword? Because, especially since you've mentioned that you're pursuing, high levels of VR, and there are limits to what you can do on an Oculus Quest.
Oh, for sure. I mean, that is, and I'd say a challenge, because most VR gaming studios today don't have big enough teams to sort of work on, optimize every version across the board if they want to have a simultaneous release. So part of why we dropped Afterlife on different platforms in different times was to be able to work with each platform as much as possible. But still, that is a challenge. It's time consuming. If you want to go for the high-end VR fidelity, the graphical fidelity, for example, that the Valve Index can do, then you have to make compromises on the Quest. And if you want to optimize the game for the Quest, then there will be compromises, of course, for Valve Index. So this is tricky. I think over time, as hopefully the industry keeps growing and we as developers keep growing, we will have the necessary resources to optimize the game specifically across the board 100% for every platform. But today, it's definitely a challenge.
I mean, I think there's always going to be a bit of a barrier, if only because something like the Valve Index is just so much more robust in its basic functionality than an Oculus Quest. I mean, at that price point, you'd expect that. But... Exactly.
It's that. I mean, the player expectations differ a lot. The kind of experience and the level of fidelity that makes Quest players happy is likely not the same as the level that are expected from, for example, Valve Index players or HTC Vive players. And so this is something we have to think about all the time. But then again, I think different games suffer more from this than other. So if you look at our puzzle game, like The Curious Tale of the Stolen Pets, that's a game that is very, very optimized for all platforms, because it's not about the hard horsepower kind of graphics. It's more about the attention to detail, the colors, and the life in the worlds. So that game could actually be optimized across each platform. It basically looks the same and it looks amazing, I think, my unbiased opinion. But so that game did not suffer from it, while another kind of game with a bigger scope, or where players expect the worlds to be more detailed, more ambient life, and more particle effects, then you definitely have a challenge to meet those expectations.
Right. And it's also worth mentioning the different levels of VR, not just in terms of graphical fidelity, what they call full room VR or room scale versus something a bit more limited. That's another Oculus Quest or PlayStation VR versus Valve Index or Vive, discrepancy.
Yeah, I think it is. It hasn't had. I mean, that discrepancy has probably not had such a big impact on our titles up to date, at least. We're still making the game for room scale, 3 times 3 meters room scale, which is the recommended home space, or 2 times 2 meters, perhaps, depending on what platforms you're on. But we haven't yet made a game with, there was actually one YouTuber who played Apex Construct just by using body motion. So he went on a football field and recorded himself by running around instead of moving with the thumbsticks and stuff. And it works. It looks amazing on video, but the game was never designed for that. So the constraints around the room scale is probably not as impactful today. I'd say it's kind of the same across the different platforms and headsets.
That once again, that's not too surprising because, as you touched upon a bit earlier, there really isn't a lot of manpower for that level of VR. Like, all I can think of at this stage is Valve.
Yeah.
They're the ones who are really in the position to, you can make a legitimate AAA game in completely in VR and, not worry about that making back its money.
True. I mean, I love Half-Life Alyx. I also kind of, squeeze my hand in my pocket about the level of expectation it's set on other VR game developers who have teams and resources maybe a tenth of what Valve had, if even that, when making Alyx. So, but it is for the better. I mean, VR gamers deserve that kind of experiences, and we're slowly getting there as well. I think our recent release, Afterlife, is quite a substantial and long horror game. It's not up on the level of Half-Life Alyx. That's not what I'm saying, but we're slowly getting to the point where the sort of full-scale experiences are coming, finally. Initially, games were either very short or repetitive, or they made compromises on the graphical scale, which were too harsh, to be honest. So, but as we grow as studios, as the industry grows, which is the most important thing, because we need to get our money back. And basically no VR studio today can sustain themselves just by game sales alone. That's very few, as a luxury very, very few have. We, Fast Travel Games, we broke even last year, which is extremely amazing for us. It took us 5 years, and hopefully we can be self-sustainable, work on even better games and bigger games, and stay in a business without the fear of having to shut down.
I suppose it's either that or, acquisition.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, that's still a thing for a lot of people. And there are investments happening as well from private and public investors. Acquisitions, like we saw that Vertigo Games got acquired by Embracer Group, for example. So they are in a financial, really nice position. Oculus, of course, or Facebook bought up the Beat Saber team.
Yep.
So that happens. For us right now, we want to be independent as long as we can, at least. We do have a financial situation, a new investment actually coming in this summer in the round of $4 million. So we are in position to make VR games for many years to come. And this will help us expand on our scope, make better and bigger products that I hope will sort of meet and maybe exceed expectations as well from the players.
Okay. And before we shift into Wraith proper, I wanted to get your perspective on PSVR, because that's kind of literally in between generations right now.
Yeah.
And I don't know if PlayStation has opened up their next gen VR yet, but is that something you're looking forward to?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I think Sony confirmed the rumors that came out last week as well now. The secret presentation that developers were supposed to be part of. So we're extremely excited. I mean, it's PSVR when it came out, I believe it was amazing, and I still think it's one of the most comfortable headsets, and the resolution is still top notch. But the stuff that basically drew it back from the thing that sort of pushed it back in gamers' priority list in terms of their favorite headsets is probably the quite complicated setup process with a lot of different cables. You have to switch between the box if you wanted to use HDR on your TV and all that. The Move controllers were not made for VR. There were no thumbsticks, no proper tracking. There was a one camera thing in front of you, no inside-out tracking. So all these sort of technical hurdles, I think, is not what gamers expect today anymore in VR. They were okay with it from the start, but Oculus Quest and Valve Index has done a lot of improvements on VR headsets since then. So the next generation VR headset from PSVR, to me as a gamer, I love everything about it. It's clearly gamer focused. It's going to be easily accessible, what it looks like at least. Quicker pick up and play, inside out tracking and all that. Controllers that are custom made for VR gaming alone, which is for us as developers, it means the world. Because that's been a tricky part to basically work on PSVR versions of our games without having to mimic, or without the option to mimic the controller setup from, for example, Quest or Rift or HTC Vive. We had to sort of remake the whole controller scheme for PSVR. So I'm super excited, and I think we still see a couple of PSVR exclusive titles being announced, like Fract is coming out in just a few days, for example. And this happens basically at the end of the life cycle of this VR headset, which is quite interesting. So there is definitely life in PSVR still, and I'm extremely excited about how Sony is viewing VR and their support behind PSVR with the next headset coming.
It sounds like it. And I'm not sure if you can confirm this yet, but does your next upcoming game seek to support the current PSVR?
So we will be releasing Wraith Afterlife on PSVR. We haven't done so yet. That's the remaining platform, basically. And we're aiming to release it this year. And should hopefully have an update about this relatively soon. And then in terms of the game coming after Wraith, the Oblivion Afterlife, we have to see. It all basically depends on when the next generation VR headset is coming out on Sony. But for us, it's definitely something we will aim for. By far, all our titles have been releasing on PSVR in the past. We have a great relationship with Sony. We are strong believers of their VR strategy. So if nothing weird happens, yes, it will also be coming out on PSVR. If it's this existing headset or exclusively for the next generation VR headset, I don't know yet. But in one way or another, the game will likely come out on PSVR.
Okay. And I suppose now is a good time to shift into Wraith the Oblivion Afterlife properly. And I suppose my first question is, okay, so for those who might not know, this is actually a World of Darkness game. It's understandable if that might be a bit obscured because, well, the Wraith campaign isn't necessarily the first or maybe even second thing you think of when you think of World of Darkness.
Yeah.
And I suppose my question there is, what made you pick the Wraith setting for a VR game?
Yeah, I'd say it's pretty third tier in terms of World of Darkness subsettings in terms of recognizability.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, clearly Vampire the Masquerade is by far the most known one and popular one. And after that, you have Werewolf the Apocalypse. And so it's no coincidence.
Yeah, and then after that, I'd say Mage probably, but
I would say Wraith and then Mage, but they're probably quite
Fair
around
enough.
the same. Yeah. But both Vampire and Werewolf have had multiple games in the past, video games coming out. Wraith had never had a video game, not a flat screen game or a VR game, of course. So the reason we decided to make a VR game based on Wraith the Oblivion is part because our creative director, Erik Odeldal, used to be a big fan of World of Darkness. He still is, but he used to read the role-playing books and stuff back in the 90s. So he's that old. And then we basically, the IP owners of World of Darkness is Paradox Interactive, a Swedish PC-centered developer you might know of.
Yes.
And we are very close to them in Stockholm, and we know some people there. I used to work with some of them in the past as well. So was it like two summers ago? I had a coffee with their business developer, and he told me that they are looking to expand on their IP, the World of Darkness IP, into more than just Vampire the Masquerade. So they suggested, or they actually asked us basically if we were interested in making a VR game based on Wraith the Oblivion. And Eric was, he went through the roof of excitement when he heard this. And then he created a pitch for what we wanted to create, a horror game which would be inviting to new players who don't have any experience of World of Darkness, but at the same time take care of the heritage, so to speak, and really treat it with care. A sort of a grown-up, not the easy jump scare kind of game, but more of a psychological horror exploration-based experience. And Paradox Interactive loved the pitch, and and we went into production pretty shortly after that. So that's how it came to be. And now we've made the world's first Wraith the Oblivion video game across the board, which is nice.
I suppose the one where you have the power to control objects remotely and walk through walls is an interesting choice for VR.
Yeah, definitely. I think walking through walls was something we said really early on. We have to be able to walk through walls. Like, just imagine doing that in real life. It's quite exciting.
What kind of self-respecting ghost can't walk through walls?
Exactly. Well, as you start out the game, you can't really. You have to learn how to walk through walls, and you get these abilities as you play through it. In the beginning, you're extremely weak as a Wraith. You don't have any powers, but you gain them gradually during your experience.
Okay. And is that based off of the Wraith rule setting, or is that something you came up with yourself?
No, it's a proper setting. So of course the house is custom made. The Barclay Mansion is not something that's been referred to in old Wraith lore. It's a custom made story and environment where the game takes place. It's also, we wanted to move away a bit from the sort of classical haunted house or gothic mansion and create something unique. So the setting in the game is actually a very luxurious, modern, big movie producer Hollywood mansion instead. And it's the house of Howard Barkley, who used to be a movie producer. He's now aged, and for some reason he arranges a seance in his house where you end up dying. So that's how the game starts, basically. So it takes a lot of the parts. The clear parts where you can see Wraith the Oblivion is in the lore, the background lore, and the way you basically behave as a Wraith. The powers you get are all classical Wraith powers referred to in the old pen and paper role-playing games and the books. Wraith Grasp, for example, is the ability to pick up objects from a distance. Insubstantiality is what the power of walking through walls is called. That's also a Wraith term. Maybe most importantly is the role of the shadow. So basically, when you die and you become a Wraith, you have your dark subconscious being materialized in as you, basically, as your follower, your guide. And this is a sinister sort of dark being that speaks to you and tasks you to do things. So in our game, it works as your in-game guide. But you don't really know if you can trust the shadow. It looks like he doesn't want you any good, but it's also the only voice or guide you have, so you basically have to listen to him. So the conflict between yourself and the role of the shadow is something we built into the game that should be very recognizable and hopefully appreciated by Wraith fans as well.
Well, I suppose that beckons the question, have fans of that campaign setting chime in on this?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think with any pop culture IP as sort of strong as World of Darkness, or for that matter, Star Wars or Lord of the Rings, you have a lot of vocal fans. So in the creation of the Shadow, we actually presented the Shadow in a 1-minute video back in January, I believe, before the game came out. How he looked, how he sounded in the game. And I'm saying he now because you play as a male character. The Shadow can be any sex really, or your sex, as when you die as a Wraith. So, but yeah, they chimed in. They chimed in on Reddit. They chimed in on on social media, on Discord, and we basically got both praise and people who said like, you can't treat the Shadow like this. The Shadow should be like this. And we tried to listen to all of it and really make sure that we treated the Shadow in the right way. Like I said, Eric is extremely passionate about World of Darkness, and we worked closely with the World of Darkness team at Paradox as well, the brand and the creators. So ultimately, I believe we made something that the majority of World of Darkness fans is appreciating.
And I guess to ask what if anything, they were not so appreciative of.
I mean, some people don't think that the Shadow should talk so much as it does in the game, and that's, I mean, part of that, I guess, is a kind of a video game compromise a bit, because you have to have some kind of guidance through the game.
Right.
Some people didn't think that you should see so much of the Shadow, which honestly, you don't really see that much of the Shadow, but you do so in the trailers we made for the game. But in the actual game, it's more of a presence in the back of your head. But seeing the Shadow as a character walking around in the seance room and talking about the fact that you're dead and all that, some fans thought that was a little bit, too clear of a writing on the wall. Like, we get it, we don't have to see this. But as I mentioned before, we also made this game for people who have no experience of World of Darkness or Wraith. So we believe we found a balance that worked for most people. But there were some hardcore fans, rightly so, who thought we could have done different things with the Shadow.
Probably, but you're never going to get purity out of transubstantiation like this. It's like, I mean,
and everybody
they've been trying with Dungeons and Dragons for decades, and it's never happened.
Yeah, and everybody has their own opinions on how tabletop RPGs should go.
Oh, right. Sure. I mean, the fact that our game is not an RPG, that was also something that some people pointed out. They wanted more, being able to create their own character in the beginning. And our game puts you in the shoes of Ed Miller, a photographer who dies in the beginning of the game. And then you play as him with his background story and his motivations and his wife who's missing and all that. So, that was another part of the Discord or the discussion that happened around the game. This is more of a exploration-based horror game rather than an RPG.
Is that in like the style of, say, Amnesia or Outcast or one of those? Yeah,
Amnesia, I'd say, is a very close. It's a source of inspiration for sure. Amnesia and maybe Alien Isolation. Mm-hmm. Those are the games that Eric has mentioned in a couple of interviews in the past as his sources of inspiration for the game. Maybe Amnesia at the most, in the way that you are always on the defense, so to speak. When you face the horrors in Afterlife, they are called specters, and they are basically twisted, tormented souls who have not yet been able to progress to the afterlife. They're stuck in the Barclay Mansion and they hate you for some reason. They're also tied to the bigger mystery in the mansion. And the way you have to basically face them is by sneaking. or making sound to lure them away from places so you can go past them, but you can't really fight them. You can't beat them. You can use your camera to flash them, camera flash to flash them and make them stunned for a few seconds. But that's about it. You don't have any powers or sort of offensive powers or weapons in our game, similar to Amnesia. So you have to hide in cupboards and closets and stuff.
Yeah,
that's cool in VR. I can say standing in a closet and having a 3-meter guy with a gun and blood coming out of his head, walking around looking for you. That's pretty exciting.
That's perhaps what that particular gaming trope needs these days. I'm not going to lie. I'm kind of tired of seeing that in every indie horror game. Yeah. I'm not saying it's a bad mechanic or anything. I'm just saying it's kind of overplayed when, all of these horror games do the exact same thing. So VR is definitely, something fresh for it.
It is. I mean, it's like you're physically standing in a closet, just waiting for someone. You lean out and you look out, and you can basically move out when things are clear. You can't walk on the glass because then the spectre might hear you and stuff. So VR actually adds to the experience. And I think the hide and seek element is boosted by so many hundreds of percent compared to a flat screen game. I think I'm also, and this is not everything you do in Afterlife. I'd say you hide in a couple of places, but then it's more about unraveling the mystery and solving the clues and finding out about the story and why you died and all that.
And how does that unfold?
You mean the story itself?
Yeah, is that you've got to find objects, you got to find notes, do you have to solve puzzles?
Yeah, so there are some puzzles in the game. There's a little bit of finding items and using them in the right manner. So you have an inventory system that consists of eventually at least, you don't have it when you start, but you get items as you play. You have a camera, and you can snap photos of memories that happened in the mansion that sort of plays up in front of you of previous guests who used to attend the seance, and maybe they died, maybe they escaped, but you can actually see what happened to the different guests by shooting their memories with your camera. So that's one thing. You can use Wraith Grasp to move the environment around and find entrances to hidden rooms and stuff where there might be some background lore, some newspaper clippings, maybe some keys to different rooms that also give you more of the background story. So there is a center mystery in the game, and that circles around the seance itself. Why that seance was arranged, why you died during the seance, and why you are now being chased by specters, and maybe one specter in particular. That's like the center of the mystery. And then the more you explore, the more you find in the game, the more of the mystery you unravel, and the more you understand about your role in all this, and the role of every character really, and every specter as well. So it's quite story driven.
And in terms of the camera and taking photos, do you have different kinds of film? I suppose that also ties into, is there a particular time period this is taking place in?
It's actually recent time, or today. So it's a modern building. The camera is still a little bit of a vintage camera because that's what Ed used to use when he was alive as a photographer. That was his favorite camera. His father's camera, actually, that's very close to him. So call it a relic item, which is something that's very closely connected to you as a person. Then you also have the flash that you can use to light up dark areas or sort of stun specters. And you have a voice recording item as well, where you can play up some voice recordings to open up safes and stuff inside the house. So there are different elements of it, but it's all set in a modern day area.
It's all a bit Fatal Frame, if I'm being honest. I don't know if you've ever played one of those games.
Oh, I have. I have, and I love them to death. But the camera mechanic in Fatal Frame is centered to the whole gameplay experience.
Right.
Here it's more of a means to unravel the story. So don't expect the same kind of, looking through the lens and trying to shoot different specters and hurt them like that. It's not used like that. It's more of a way of sort of bringing old memories to life.
Indeed. And how long would you say it takes to complete the game?
It looks like it takes players around 8 hours to complete it.
Oh.
And then, of course, if you want to find all the collectibles and basically get to 100% completion rate, you might have to add 2-3 hours on top of that.
That's quite substantial for a VR game.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, Apex Construct, our first game, took probably 5-6 hours, but then you also went back to some of the same locations and all that. This time you have an interconnected house and a garden to explore that gradually grows and unlocks as you play. So it feels like these 8 hours just fly by because things constantly happen in the game and it pushes you forward into new rooms and new areas and new revelations.
Well, perhaps more relevantly, you're not going to beat the game in one sitting, which I feel like a lot of VR games are optimized to be able to be beaten in one sitting.
Yeah, I agree. I think length that's been a huge discussion for VR among VR gamers for many years now. The fact that games are too short and the fact that there's not enough play minutes per dollar, so to speak. That's one way of measuring it, not the only way, of course, but I agree that 8 hours for a horror game like this with a couple of extra is quite substantial. Absolutely.
Okay. And I guess to tie it all into our previous bit of conversation, what's being done to optimize this game for the PlayStation VR?
Well, I think we're trying to bring it as close as possible to the PC VR level. But I think most of the time, as I said before, goes into making sure that it plays as smoothly and as seamlessly on the PSVR due to the controller limitations. Because you don't have the natural means of moving around with the thumbsticks. And this is a game that requires to move controllers for PSVR today. So that's something we're spending a lot of time with, of course. Apart from that, it's just getting the fidelity as much as we can up to the highest standard. We haven't yet gone through their certification process fully, so we will know what Sony says about the whole thing. But it looks good so far. First signs are encouraging that they like it. So we'll see. But it's gonna look really good on PSVR.
That's good to hear. And let me see. I suppose my final question is in regards to your upcoming project. Can we look for news on that in the near future, or maybe a bit farther along in the timescale?
I'd say not in the near future, and mostly because we're trying to expand on the game a bit since our initial production start, because we believe so strongly in it. We want to make sure it's really catered for marketing expectations of this year or the next. So we actually had plans of announcing it this summer. We pushed those plans forward. So I couldn't really say when we will tell the world about it, but it shouldn't be too long, but not in the nearest future. Yeah. It's very vague. It's vague, but it's still depending a lot of things. We have to first and foremost make sure we can make a game that can be released in a reasonable time frame after we announce it. We don't want to have a game announced and then wait for a year or two until we drop it. So I think, from a marketing perspective, I'd say 3 to 6 months is optimal today for VR specifically. So from that perspective, I have to feel comfortable and convinced that we can drop the game as planned before we announce it. Otherwise, we will wait with the announcement a little longer.
Fair enough, I suppose. And I'll see if my colleagues here have any further questions for you.
No, I think you've answered most of my questions, and I think that it's probably like pick a character, or rather like having a pre-made character to go through and use some of the mechanics is probably, I don't know about more common, but probably the better way of trying to do a tabletop RPG as a video game. Because if you allow people to make a character, either you're gonna have so many different possibilities that it's impossible to account for, or people are going to complain that they don't have all of the possibilities.
Yeah, you're probably right. And we really wanted to tell a story in this game as well. Mm-hmm. I mean, the story is really great, I think, and substantial in the game and interesting. And that's hard to do if you have a generic character you can't really build a background for. So that's also one of the reasons why we went with this way. Mm-hmm. But RPGs in VR, I think, or I hope at least, should be a genre that we see more of over the next few years. We haven't seen many good RPGs at all in VR yet. That has its reasons, of course, with the longer play sessions needed and VR's sort of limitations in that area. But I hope that VR and RPG games become a thing, maybe in 2022 and forward.
I mean, not for anyway. Andreas, I want to thank you for taking time out of your schedule and being with us here today. It was lovely talking to you, and maybe we'll have you on the program again when your next project is actually ready to be talked about.
Absolutely, and thanks again for having me. It was a blast.
No problem. Anyway, in the meantime, the game is Wraith: The Afterlife Oblivion. It is currently available.
Wraith: The Oblivion Afterlife.
Yeah. I know it's one of the more confusing game titles out there. It comes with the territory of working with World of Darkness. So we've heard so many variations of the game. We called it Wraith Afterlife, but the actual name is what you said right now, like Wraith: The Oblivion Afterlife. Yeah.
Well, that's because they like having the official campaign setting. It's not just vampires, Vampire the Masquerade, and Werewolf the Apocalypse.
Or Vampire the whatever the new one was.
Yeah.
But, it's still about, exactly.
Yeah. But anyway, Wraith: The Oblivion Afterlife is currently available on the Oculus Store and the Steam Store. It retails for $30, $29.99. Be sure to pick it up today. Right, so that'll about do it for this installment in Fragments of Silicon. Be sure to tune in on Sunday for our review session. And until then, I shall wish you good gaming.